Hello everybody, today I got a bit of a different video idea for you today. Kind of thought about this while I was working and thought this would just be an interesting thing to do. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a big beat bracket. So what we're doing is a 32 item bracket between 32 different music albums, all from the genre of big beat. So I've got 32 here, just kind of made it in GIMP, just quick and dirty and easily. So just got it all here and done. But before we begin and before we get into it, obviously, what is Big Beat and why talk about it? Well, Big Beat is a genre of electronic dance music that was very popular. I want to say kind of, or well, it had its moment between the years of 1994 and I want to say 2002, where it kind of died and never really resurrected. There's been like some albums and some singles, some albums on here. How many? Maybe just one, maybe like two albums on here, maybe like three albums on here, or maybe beyond 2002. But for the most part, this is a genre that is mostly died at this point, outside of like a few straggler singles that may even like just be influenced by the genre. But I wanted to talk about Big Beat because Big Beat for me is a genre that I think I really like. There's a lot of albums in this genre that I think very highly of and that I play a lot. There's also a lot of albums in this genre that I think can be kind of mid to almost bad. And so I think it's an interesting genre to talk about. And so what I did here in this bracket is I got 32 albums that I thought should belong on a big beat bracket list, and I'll show them up on the screen now in post editing. Hopefully, you guys can see it. It's here. These are the 32 albums that I've got here, just kind of sorted by, I don't know. I'll find out. But there you go. You now saw it, and we'll get into the actual brackets now, and we'll start kind of getting into each pairing. But before that, I just wanted to say that the way I laid out this bracket is first, I picked 32 Big Beat albums, and some of these albums I am kind of fudging the kind of fudging the definition of what a Big Beat album is, because I guess I never really went into the sound. As I said, it's a genre of electronic dance music, and the actual sound of the genre is kind of a mixture between like hip hop, techno, acid techno, breakbeat music, rock music as well, a little bit as well. But depending on which album you're talking about, there could be other types of genres that could be infused as well, like acid jazz or plunderphonics, or looking at this list here, or like psychedelia could be a huge factor in this as well. And so what I did is I kind of went off of that basis on picking 32 big beat albums. And then I kind of put them in a random name picker, and then I just kind of laid them out as as this application was randomly picking them. So this is just kind of like random pairings, not normally like I think normally brackets will do like a seed type system. I didn't really do like a seed type system. I just picked them randomly. So hopefully it will kind of lead to some interesting conversations here and there. Though I will say, I will give out a little bit of a spoiler. The game here is a little bit rigged. I definitely know which album of these 32 is going to win the entire bracket. But the point is to kind of talk about these albums, especially since not only have I listed these out, but I've listened to all 32 of these albums within like the past week. So they're all kind of fresh in my mind, just a little bit. We'll get into it on certain albums in here. So I guess I already said let's get into it a while ago, and then I kept going. I kept rambling. Let's actually get into it. And as I said, I put these all in GIMP. So once I zoom in here, it's going to be a little bit pixelated, but I'll explain each album as I go along. So let's go to this first bracket here, all the way on the top left. We have the Prodigy's Invaders Must Die versus Fatboy Slim's Better Living Than Chemistry, Better Living in Chemistry, something like that. Through Chemistry, that's what it's called. So what we have here is this Prodigy album here. It's kind of a late era one. 2009, I believe, is when this released. So very much past the whole big beat craze. But to me, an album that doesn't get enough due. It's got amazing production, amazing like back end to it, like the actual low or the low end is what I meant to say. It's got amazing low end to it, super fat sound to it. Very influenced by, at least to me, it's very influenced by like Justice's Cross a little bit. But I do think Liam kind of put his own spin on that sound and created something that I think personally for me is an undeniable classic within the Prodigy's catalog. Definitely a great album. Definitely something that I could highly recommend. Meanwhile, the album it's going up against would be Norman Cook's first solo album ish. Norman Cook, for those who don't know, is Fatboy Slim. Norman Cook also had a musical career before Fatboy Slim. Obviously, he was part of, I think he was part of the House Martins, is what he was called, or what that band was called. And then after he left that, he did like some solo stuff under a bunch of different pseudonyms before finally going with Fatboy Slim. And so this album is like the first album under that pseudonym, and as such, I believe that Better Living Through Chemistry could be kind of considered to be among the first big beat albums ever released, and as such, it is of note, especially with tracks such as Santa Cruz and Song for Lindy, which I think are pretty beloved within the big beat genre. That being said, there's a reason why people remember maybe like those two tracks and nothing else on this record. Once you get past those two albums, you get into the problem of Cook's entire discography. And if any Fatboy Slim fans are listening, they've probably heard this criticism of Cooks' music throughout his entire catalog, and that is that Cooks' style of electronic music and especially big beat can become very, very obnoxious very quickly. Especially for me, a song like Santa Cruz is just, it's so obnoxious. It takes this idea that is very good and very catchy and just beats it to death. And I mean like really to death. And so when you get to like the third and fourth track of this record, you really start to disassociate. At least I really started to. And it goes on way too long and the songs just get really annoying. So for me, for this first pairing here, I would say that Invaders Must Die definitely continues here. So I'll go ahead and duplicate it and I'll move it to the next bracket here. So I would say Invaders Must Die is the better album, in my opinion. Next we have Lunatic, this is hard to say, Lunatic Calm's Metropole versus the Jet Set Radio original soundtrack, original quote unquote, done by Sega et al. Because there's a bunch of different musicians on it, so we'll talk about that. But first, Lunatic Calm, Metropole. I think the highest, the most fame that this album has gotten is I believe that the opening track, or if not the opening track, it's like the second track because I think this album has like an intro. But like the first real track, I believe, is featured somewhere in the Matrix, and I don't remember. But Metropole, decent album. I would say if you want an album that gets the feeling of like a big beat album, but is nothing super specific, if you just want like the vibe of a big beat album without actually having memorable songs, Metropole is your album. I don't think it's a bad album, but God, do I not remember much from it. Not really much from it at all. Meanwhile, you have the Jet Set Radio original soundtrack. And by the way, this is not a representation of every single track that has appeared in the original Jet Set Radio video game. I will put on screen now the track listing that I'm using. It's like the track listing that is on streaming services, and I'm going from what opens this album actually? I think it's I think it's Let Mom Sleep begins this one, and then you end with Grace and Glory. But anyway, not just to get into the jet. First, like maybe I should explain what Jet Set Radio is. So Jet Set Radio is a video game released in I want to say 1999, if not 1998, on the Sega Dreamcast. It is a platforming video game where you play as skater gang, as a youth skater gang in a an alternate Tokyo that is going through like a an authoritarian regime suppression type environment. And so, as such, Sega enlisted a bunch of different artists to contribute what they saw at the time as like popular music in terms of like hip hop and techno. And so, a lot of that does come from Big Beat, especially the stuff that comes from Hideki Naganuma and the one track on here from Richard Jacques, which would be Everybody Jump Around, which is really famous. That stuff on this album really good. Now, and again, calling this an album maybe kind of stretching the definition of an album just a little bit. But I will say that in terms of like the actual track listing that we're working with here for the Jet Set Radio soundtrack, not the strongest thing in the world, in my opinion. There are great tracks on this. As I said, the strongest stuff on this album is the stuff from Hideki Naganuma and Richard Jacques. Everything else on this album, I can kind of take or leave. That plus the actual flow of this soundtrack isn't as strong as I would like it to be. And again, I know this is going to be sacrilege for some people because this is an extremely beloved soundtrack. But like thinking about this as an album, if we're going to think about this as an album, it's not the strongest thing in the world. That being said, I will take the Jet Set Radio soundtrack over Metropole any day because I can remember it. I I can remember it. It has distinct songs. It has a distinct style. It has nostalgia. It has the cultural staying power. It's what people remember, and I think it is better in my opinion. It is better. Next, we have two heavyweights in the genre. We have Fatboy Slim's "You've Come a Long Way, Baby" versus the Prodigy's "The Fat," or well, I think it's just Prodigy's "Fat of the Land," because Liam and the gang were just going by Prodigy at this point. That would change once there was like some potential legal issue with Prodigy from Gangstar, and so they had to change their name from Prodigy to The Prodigy. Uh, but again, two big heavyweights, two albums that are very fondly remembered here and very, very symbolic of this genre and of this sound. First, you have Fatboy Slim's "You've Come a Long Way, Baby," which is one of the most iconic albums that of this genre. You have Right Here, Right Now. You've got Rockefeller Skank. You've got Praise You. You've got other tracks on here. The production on this album is so much better than it is on Better Living Through Chemistry. The songs are just so much better. It's so much more memorable. I do really like this album, especially over the years. When I initially listened to "You've Come a Long Way," to me, I thought it was a little overrated, but I've really come to appreciate what Cook does on this album, as well as just the feel good vibes of "You've Come a Long Way." And so for me, it's a strong album, though as I said earlier, one of the facets of Cook's entire discography is that his songs can get obnoxious, and there are obnoxious moments on this album. I'm specifically thinking of tracks like "Fucking in Heaven," which is plays its joke way out for way too long. And I do think that the last two tracks of this, Acid 8000, I think it's called Acid 8000, and Love Island, are not the strongest way to end this record for me. Meanwhile, we have "The Fat of the Land" by The Prodigy, which is their best album, perhaps one of the best big beat albums of all time, perhaps one of the best electronic dance music albums of all time. One of the most exciting things I've been seeing lately is that I've been seeing a lot of people on the internet really come to bat for "Fat of the Land," which I'm really happy about, because "Fat of the Land" is amazing. To me, it's a near perfect album. It is everything I love about the Prodigy, but just so much more. The flow of it is so exciting. Really gets your blood pumping. There's so much creative sample usage. There's so much. There's just so much here that there is to love. So while I can sit here and pretend like, oh, what should I choose? Obviously, that I have to give it to Fat of the Land on this pairing. Fat of the Land is one of those albums that's just it's so fun. It's so exciting. It's so creative. It's everything that I want in an album. So with that out of the way, we've got Midfield General's Generalization. First is the Chemical Brothers' Surrender. I don't know why it took me a little bit to think of the name, even though it's like right in front of me. So Midfield General, if you don't know what Midfield General is, that is the pseudonym of Damian Harris. Damian Harris is the head of Skint Records. Skint Records is a big label when it comes to big beat. There's a few. There's Skint Records. I think Astral Works was a big label at the time. Wall of Sound as well. Damian is, I believe, or rather, Skint is also home to Fatboy Slim, and I believe Damien and Norman are good friends, or at least they were. I don't know what their relationship is now. I haven't really kept up with that. But I believe Damien is still around doing the business work of Skint Records. Though in his spare time, he has released two albums. This is the better of the two. The other one, General Disarray, excuse me. The other one, General Disarray, one of the worst records ever made, in my opinion. But Generalization is an extremely solid Big B album. In fact, I wish people talked about this album more. I think it deserves a lot more attention. I love what Damien has done here. I love just like tracks like Devil in Sports Casual or Ricky 39 or even Midfielding, which has one of my favorite. It's like one of my favorite story songs, especially since like the actual story being told is like really funny in my opinion. So great album overall. Highly underrated album in my opinion. Something super memorable and something that I wish just more people talked about. Versus Surrender by the Chemical Brothers, which is very well remembered. Every time I see people talk about this album, it's generally agreed that it's one of the Chemical Brothers' best records. It's fondly remembered, fondly rated when it's like on like critic platforms. I believe Pitchfork gave this like a 9 point something at one point. So very beloved album here by many, and I think it is overrated. I hate this album. It probably isn't my least favorite album on this bracket, but goddamn is it close. While the Chemical Brothers, I think, are extremely great artists when it comes to big beat and electronic dance music in general, I think Surrender misses the mark in a lot of ways for me. There are some tracks on this album that I really like and I think is some of their best work. Stuff like Music Response and Let Forever Be. There's other tracks on here that are extremely annoying and some of their worst stuff like Out of Control, or and this is gonna get probably another huge reaction, but I think Hey Boy Hey Girl on this record is some of the worst stuff that Chemical Brothers has ever done. I also don't really like the ending to this record. I think it's just called Dream On. Very cliche ending in my opinion. Surrender feels like an album where the Chemical Brothers, which is Ed Simons and I want to say Tim Rowlands. I probably got that wrong. Give me a second. It's Ed Simons and Tom Rowlands. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so close. Tom, Tom, not Tim. So Ed and Tim were like looking at their previous two records, Exit Planet Dust and Dig Your Own Hole, both of which we will talk about on this bracket. They looked at both of those, saw the psychedelic influences, and thought that they really needed to kind of ratchet that up and make it like a psychedelic rock experience as an album. And I don't think they nail it personally for me. I think it's kind of grating. I think it's kind of boring in certain parts as well. And I think that in terms of the Chemical Brothers, you could do a whole lot better. So I'm gonna go with generalization on this one because I think it's the better record. It has the more memorable tracks, has the more memorable production. I think it's just catchier songs in general, more interesting record as well. So that's my opinion on it. Next, we have Boom Boom Satellites' Out Loud versus Primal Scream's Exterminator. So both of these albums, it's interesting that this is the pairing we got here because both of these albums are like what I was talking about when I said that we are really kind of skirting the line and kind of fudging the definition of big beat a little bit because we have Boom Boom Satellites here with Out Loud, which is almost kind of like a new jazz fusion type record where you got this really dark jazzy production to it. This album almost kind of feels like you're kind of running through the beginning of a night to the early dawn of the next morning. And so it's just this very nocturnal sound to it with this very interesting and creative production. I really love just there's a lot of tracks on Out Loud I really love. Obviously Batter the Jam, uh what's that? Scattering Monkeys really good. What's the one with the vocals with the really hoarse vocals? I always love you. Push Eject. Push Eject is what I was thinking of. Push Eject is an insane track. If you've not heard Push Eject by Boom Boom Satellites, you really should. It'll knock your socks off. It's incredible. So you have that versus Primal Scream's Exterminator, which is an also interesting album because if you don't know who Primal Scream is a band that started kind of within the baggy Manchester scene or like the jangle rock. I think it's called like jangle rock or jangle pop scene where they were kind of like it was kind of like the Stone Roses a little bit before Bobby Gillespie, the band's band leader, started working with Andrew Weatherall and the Orb to create Screamadelica's or to create Screamadelica, which is probably one of the albums to really help define electronic dance music of the 90s. It is probably one of the most important albums of electronic dance music of that decade. And so there's that, and that album's great. If you haven't listened to Screamadelica by Primal Scream, you really should. It's amazing. After that, they made try if you don't give up, give out, I think it's called. It's got like a neon Confederate flag album cover. Not anymore, I think. I think they replaced that album cover on streaming services. The original album cover was like a Confederate flag or like a neon Confederate flag. And it's mostly kind of blues rock with a little bit of that techno that they were experimenting with on Screamadelica kind of mixed in or more not techno but the dance music influences mixed into that a little bit. But it's not a great album. Then there was Vanishing Point, which used to be an album that I used to really love, but I'll probably talk about that in a future video. But Vanishing Point, good album. But then you get Exterminator here, which I believe released 2001 and very near to Kid A by Radiohead, which is very interesting because both of these albums kind of both of those albums, Kid A and Exterminator, kind of capture the same general feeling or both capture their current moment but in different ways. Kid A is more of kind of like the social isolation of the turn of the century. Meanwhile, Exterminator is more of like the paranoia, especially like the post 9/11 feeling of paranoia and surveillance and the rise of authoritarianism. That's kind of what this album tackles, and I think it tackles it very well. Now, in terms of genre, calling this a big beat album would kind of be doing it a little bit of a disservice. It is a bunch of different things, as Primal Scream albums tend to be, but I will say that big beat does play a role in influencing the sound of this record. And so if you are a big beat fan, if you are a fan of the of like albums in this bracket, and if you haven't heard Exterminator yet, hell, if you haven't heard Exterminator yet and you're just a general music fan, I would highly recommend checking it out. It's a mostly great album, that has one huge blemish on it. And it's gonna come from an artist that we all know and love within Big Beat. That would be Chemical Brothers with their remix of the song Swastika Eyes, which is so bad on this record. It feels like such a lazy remix. It feels like a B tier out of control instrumental, which if you remember me talking about Surrender, Out of Control was a track that I didn't really like all that much. And so to have a B tier version of that as like the instrumental remix of this song, it just I don't understand how it still boggles my mind how bad this remix is. Because Chemical Brothers, one of my favorite artists, but it feels like they didn't try. And like it also feels like Primal Scream only really included a second remix because there's two versions of Swastika Eyes on this album, and Chemical Brothers is the second one. And I don't know why they felt like they needed to include it, other than they wanted to try and recapture the magic of Screamadelica, because Screamadelica had two remixes of the same song on the same album. So maybe that's what they were trying to do, but like again, I don't think Chemical Brothers meet the moment, and that remix just kind of really messes with the flow of this record. And so that's my thoughts on both of these. It's kind of a tough pairing for me because it could go either way. I like both of these a lot, but for me, if I were to really enjoy Exterminator, I would have to like delete that remix. Because otherwise, like the stuff that they're doing with like Kevin Shields, and they have like the bassist from the Stone Roses on Exterminator as well. Uh, the stuff that they're doing is great, but I think like as an album, I think Out Loud kind of outperforms Exterminator just a little bit more. I prefer a little bit more. I prefer that kind of oops. I prefer that nocturnal feeling. I prefer that dark, moody, jazzy atmosphere to this record. So I'm gonna go with Out Loud personally. Next, we're gonna have another tough pairing because we have two near perfect soundtracks in my opinion. You have the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack, original soundtrack, versus the first disc of the Air Gear soundtrack. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Excuse me. So first, let's talk about the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack. Again, like the Jet Set Radio soundtrack, I am not using every song that has appeared in Future. Excuse me. Instead, I'm going to show the track listing that I'm using, which goes from Concept of Love to the remix of Grace and Glory that appears on streaming services. And what I can say about this soundtrack and this track listing is that it is, in my opinion, one of the best things I've ever heard. It is so bold. It is so futuristic. It is some of the best music you could ever listen to. The Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack to me is just it's such an amazing collection of tracks and such an achievement to music in general as like a medium that for me it is my personal favorite electronic dance music album of all time, which might be giving that game away a little bit. But like I have nothing bad to say about this soundtrack. It's incredible. If you haven't listened to it, you really should. And talking about another soundtrack that it's incredible and you really should listen to, that would be the Skank Funk soundtrack for the Air Gear anime. So if you don't know what Air Gear is Air Gear is a manga created by a guy who goes by the name of like Oh Great. I forget what his actual name is, but it is kind of like if you were to put like the concept of a jet set radio into a manga, that's kind of what Air Gear is. It's about like a bunch of kids who are going around skating on air gears, which are kind of like souped up roller skates. And there's like this whole uh, like gang territory system to the story. There's also like a secret organization and kind of climbing your way to the top. So it's pretty beloved by people who know about it. I've tried to revisit Air Gear since I first since I first kind of found out about it. I used to like it a lot. Now I think there's flaws to the actual manga, but regardless of what I think, it got loved enough to where it got turned into a 24 episode OVA anime. And the anime got a soundtrack to it. That would be what this is. The full name of this particular disc is Air Gear: What a Groovy Trick. This is the first disc of two. The second disc of this is just like a bunch of remixes. It's kind of why it's not on here. But this soundtrack here, it was produced actually by Hideki Naganuma, who is also part of Jet Set Radio Future, of the Jet Set Radio Future and Jet Set Radio soundtracks. It's produced by Hideki Naganuma, and he even does like one or two tracks on this soundtrack. But there's also a bunch of other artists that contribute to this soundtrack. I think all of them are either ex-Sega composers or adjacent to that in some way. I'll try and put their names up here on the screen now so that I can give them the credit that is due to them. Because ultimately, as I said, to me, this Air Gear soundtrack is near perfect. There's not a single track on here I dislike. I love it to death. I wish more people would talk about it. And I wish it wasn't paired against the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack, because I would love for this to move forward, because I rock with this soundtrack so much. It's so creative, it's so energetic, it gets your blood pumping. It's just it's again, it's everything I want in an album. That being said, everything that I do want in an album is right above it. That would be the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna find it here and we're gonna move it forward. But that being said, still, if you haven't listened to it, I don't think this Air Gear soundtrack is on streaming services. I think you mostly have to find it on YouTube, but you really should go and seek it out. It is that great. It is something that you should absolutely listen to before you, like, I don't know, like there's like that book called like 1,000 albums to listen to before you die. I feel like this soundtrack should be like part of that book if I were to write that kind of book. So next we have two kind of outliers here, two albums that most Big Beat fans and most people might not know about. We have Adam Freeland's Now and Them versus Bentley Rhythm Ace's For Your Ears Only. So Adam Freeland, let's start with that one. Adam Freeland is an artist. He is mostly kind of associated with the new school breaks genre, more so than Big Beat. But then again, new school breaks, at least I think that's what that genre is called. But new school breaks is basically like an evolution on Big Beat anyway. Not a super popular genre, only really existed in like the early 2000s here. But I thought I would include Now and Them anyway, because it is very Big Beat adjacent, and I do think it is something that a lot of Big Beat fans should listen to. It's a great album. It's got amazing production, amazing songs on to it, got a great flow to it. The concept in itself is kind of interesting, as it is as a critique on, as I said, this is early 2000s, and I think this album released post 9/11. So you have some post 9/11 themes here, like surveillance and people trying to control other people via authoritarian means. And I really like that stuff. I will say that as Now and Then continues, Freeland's solution seems to be just like kind of like this 90ism thing of like, oh, you just gotta engage with reality. Reality's the only true thing, man. And that kind of soils the ending of this record just a little bit. But I still think that it's a nice sounding record and one that is absolutely worth your time. Meanwhile, we have a record that I'm really into, but probably not a lot of other people are into. That'd be Bentley Rhythm Ace's second album, For Your Ears Only. So Bentley Rhythm Ace, we'll talk about their first album once we get to the other side of this bracket. But Bentley Rhythm Ace is a group that, how do I kind of describe it? They're a Big Beat adjacent group, but they're also very integrated into like Plunderphonics, which was another genre that kind of got popular during the 90s. And Plunderphonics is basically like any music that is built out of a majority of other music. So for example, the most famous album within the Plunderphonics genre would be The Avalanche's Since I Left You, also DJ Shadows' Introducing. I guess you could also kind of put Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique in there just a little bit. So that's kind of what Plunderphonics is, though I would say that Plunderphonics does kind of have its own sound to it. But going back to For Your Ears Only here, For Your Ears Only definitely goes more into the Plunderphonics sound than it does into the big beat sound. It is probably the most experimental album on this list, and as such, I can see a lot of people not really getting into it, which I can understand. I really like this record. I think it's really creative. I think there's a lot to it. I especially like Bentley Rhythm Ace's very cartoony brand of electronic music and of big beat and of Plunderphonics. Listening to a Bentley Rhythm Ace album can almost kind of be like listening to a Saturday morning cartoon kind of vibe a little bit. So I like it, but again, not for everybody, and I totally understand that. But matching up to Now and Them, I would say that I enjoy Now and Them a lot more. I think Now and Them just kind of flows a lot better. I think it has the more solid songs in general. It's more of a good time. That being said, I will say that For Your Ears Only, certainly a grower, certainly something you should check out. And then we have the final pairing of the left side of the bracket here. We have Groove Armada's Vertigo versus Low Fidelity All Stars' How to Operate with a Blown Mind. So let's talk about Groove Armada's Vertigo first. This is an album that is very much kind of fudging the definition of a bug beat, a big beat just a little bit, excuse me. Um so the actual sound of this record is a little bit more in line with uh what's that genre called? It's more in line with like down tempo music, which was another kind of another kind of 90s genre, down tempo, which was this kind of it's the style of electronic dance music that has like this lower tempo to it, a little bit more chilled vibes to it. And I will say that personally, I really love Vertigo to an extent. There's a lot to me that Groove Armada does right. The production is really great. The songs are really great. A lot of really great songs on this, like Chicago, and especially what's that called? To the River, For the River, something like that. At the River is what it's called. At the River, such a classic track. A track that you should absolutely listen to whenever you get the chance. That's such an amazing track. The closing cuts, like In My Bones, is really good. Your Song, awesome stuff. All the really down tempo-y type songs on this album work really well. And if this were like a 10-song, 56-minute album, this would be a near perfect album for me. That being said, it is not. There are two tracks on this album that really should not be here. That would be I See You Baby and If Everybody Looked the Same, which are very Norman Cook adjacent, very Fatboy Slim adjacent, in that they are extremely obnoxious, and the sonic palette of them just does not fit with this more chilled out vibe that is throughout the rest of the record. I don't understand why these two tracks are in here. So I would say if you do listen to this album, you can listen to the whole thing with those two tracks included, first and foremost. But then I would say take those two tracks out and just listen to the 10 tracks that you have left. And it's so much more. It's a shorter album, which makes it more manageable to listen to. And I think it's just a better album overall because it keeps that tone really consistent. So you have that album, Vertigo, which I really love. And then you have probably the closest thing that you're going to get to in terms of like a so bad it's good album on this bracket. That would be How to Operate with a Blown Mind. And I'm so woke. My mind is blown. I see reality, man. This I have learned to really enjoy How to Operate with a Blown Mind. It is not a good album. I will say first and foremost, it is not a good album. But it's an entertaining one. There's like some tracks here that are kind of interesting, goes into like kind of techno and even like disco territory for a little bit. But there's also other tracks on here. Like there's this spoken word intro that is so dumb. There's also like another track here where, and I don't remember the names of the tracks, but there's like another track on here where there's like a guy going like, we're not part of the loser clan. We're part of like we're the winners. We're the cool guys. This is just, it's so lame. It's so lame that it kind of comes back around to entertaining. So, could I recommend How to Operate a Blown Mind? Sure, under the right pretenses, but ultimately I would say very clearly Vertigo is the better record here. It is it's got the better production, got the better songs to it. Even if I were to include the two tracks that I dislike, I See You Baby and If Everybody Looked the Same. If I'm including that in saying that this album is just is it's tons better than How to Operate to me. Tons better. So there you go. There's our left side of the bracket. So that's what that looks like. Now let's get to the right side of the bracket. So starting off with the left side of the bracket, we have Bentley Rhythm Ace's self-titled debut album versus the Tekken 3 soundtrack, which is by Sano DG and BKO. I think I got that right. So you have Bentley Rhythm Ace's debut album. We've already kind of talked about Bentley Rhythm Ace, especially when I was talking about For Your Ears Only. I mentioned that their brand of big beat is very kind of Saturday morning cartoon-ish, which might not be for everybody. But that being said, I do think that a lot of more people would kind of hang more onto the self-titled debut than they would For Your Ears Only. There's better tracks in terms of just like accessibility and structure. I think that the creativity that Bentley Rhythm Ace shows in terms of like the samples they pick and how they kind of tie them together is really interesting. I also just there's just like a ton of really interesting, engaging, and memorable tracks, especially what's it called? Bentley's Gonna Sort You Out is a really good one. I also like Mind That Gap. There's the one, it's Space Hopper, really good as well. So many good tracks on this. And speaking of an album that has so many good tracks on it, you have the Tekken 3 soundtrack, which to this day is still widely remembered and widely loved. I love this soundtrack a lot. So many great tracks to it. I do like how the album is kind of, or as an album, so forth, because it is a soundtrack at the end of the day. As an album, you do get like, it starts with like an intro and like the character select music, and then every other track beyond that point is like a theme of a character, which I think keeps the track listing interesting and engaging and offers like a different mood and a different atmosphere as you go along, so that this album never really gets tiring. Because the Tekken 3 soundtrack, if I remember, it is a little bit of a long one. Certainly a little bit of a long one, but I would say definitely worth the the remembrance and the love that it still receives to this day. So in terms of like which is the better album or the better collection of songs that I like more, this one's a little bit of a tough one. I think personally for me, I really enjoy Bentley Rhythm Ace. So I think that's what I'm gonna go with. That's my personal taste. I just to me it's an album that I just get a lot out of. Why did I keep merging this down? It's an album I get a lot out of. It's an album that I remember so fondly and I think just has a lot of great tracks to it. So I think that's the album that should continue. All right, let's move on to the next pairing here. We have the Crystal Methods Tweekend versus Chemical Brothers' debut album Exit Planet Dust. So we have probably one of my least favorite albums in on this whole bracket versus one of the most important albums on this whole bracket. So Crystal Methods Tweekend is certainly an album. It follows their debut album Vegas, and I think features, or I don't want to say I think, I did just listen to it. It features more of like a rock oriented sound to it, And something that I will touch upon again once we do get to Vegas, because it is on this list. Um, but something that is very common when you're listening to like a Crystal Method album is that they're a duo that is very, very skilled when it comes to production. Their albums sound great. They normally know how to make an album that sounds like a great album. That being said, they're not very good at making really memorable songs, especially on Tweekend. There's mostly every song on this album kind of blends together for me. I literally listened to this yesterday. It was the last album I listened to for this bracket, and I still cannot tell you most of the track names. I know that the album starts with a track called PhD, which I'm pretty sure stands for pretty huge disappointment. And then nostalgically, I remember Name of the Game, which is probably the most interesting track on the album. It's a track that feels like it is trying to capture the zeitgeist of like new metal and rap metal, which was kind of becoming popular around this time, or maybe it was popular around this time and they wanted to get in on it. But regardless, it kind of is their attempt at that, but in their own style. And as such, it's very I think it's probably the only successful track in terms of like getting into your brain and staying there. I will say also that the music video for Name of the Game has like a character called like Nosy in it. It's basically like a human but with like a really big nose for a head. So that's cool, I guess. But otherwise, yeah, Tweekend not a great album. I felt like by the end of listening to this album, I felt like I was gonna go crazy because I don't really like the album, and I think it's just boring and mind numbing. And I truly do mean mind numbing. I felt like I was getting dumber listening to this album. So you have Tweekend versus Exit Planet Dust, which I had described as probably one of the most important albums on this list. It is one of the earliest Big Beat album, or one of the earliest albums to be labeled as Big Beat, or as what Big Beat kind of started as. The first kind of name for Big Beat was kind of Chemical Beats, and that's directly from a track off of this album, I believe is where that name comes from, before Big Beat got named because of the Big Beat boutique that was being ran by Fatboy Slim, I believe is how the history goes. Probably getting that wrong. Not a history, not like a big source. Don't treat me as like a source in terms of history. It's definitely, if you're more interested on it, there are interviews about it. But as I said, very important, especially since a lot of when you go and you actually read critic reviews of a lot of these different albums that I have here on this bracket, they will always be compared back to Exit Planet Dust. So this is Exit Planet Dust really is like the ground zero in terms of like Big Beat and its sound and its identity. And it's also an amazing album. From front to back, I think it's near perfect. There's not really a flaw on it. It's got an amazing flow to it. Love the first half of this album, which is very kind of techno dance focused music. And then by the end, it gets a little bit more kind of euphoric and you get like more breathing room. It's a really cool album in that way, in that the flow is just, it's so well organized. So I mean, personally, to me, this is a no brainer. I Exit Planet Dust wins this matchup hands down. Then we get to, let's call them unconventional albums on this list. One isn't necessarily an album. Again, it's a soundtrack. That would be the Fight Club soundtrack by Mike Simpson and John King. Or I could have gotten that mixed up, and it's John King and Mike. Is it John Simpson? No, it's Mike. It's Mike Simpson and John King, who are the Dust Brothers, and that would be the Fight Club soundtrack. And then we have Meat Beat Manifesto Storm the Studio. So let's start with the Fight Club soundtrack. Obviously, Fight Club now as a movie, very, very well remembered, has an extreme legacy to it in terms of like filmmaking and narrative and themes. There are people who love this movie. There are people who interpret this movie correctly. There are people who interpret the movie incorrectly. There's, of course, also the book that I don't remember the author's name, but the book is also very highly regarded as well. And the movie, which was directed by the Zodiac director and Social Network director, David Fincher, there you go, got his name, has a very interesting soundtrack to it. It is done by the Dust Brothers, which, if you don't know who the Dust Brothers are, they are a duo, a production duo mainly known for hip hop, especially within like the Delicious vinyl label. Their main claim to fame is through their production efforts on Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique. They helped the Beastie Boys kind of get that sound, and as such, are they, even though the Dust Brothers aren't normally named when people talk about Paul's Boutique, the Dust Brothers are still there, and they are definitely part of that album's legacy. I also wanted to point out that there is another guy who was also part of Delicious Vinyl that should also be named, that I don't remember the... I'll look up... What was his name? Delicious Vinyl... Matt Dyke. Matt Dyke should also be kind of mentioned. He's not on this album, but Matt Dyke also helped with the production of Paul's Boutique and with Tone Loc's album, Loked After Dark, which is very good. So if you like Paul's Boutique and if you like this soundtrack, check out Loked After Dark. Amazing album. Even if you're like a Big Beat fan, you should still check out that album. Or just a fan of music in general. Check out Loked After Dark. Super interesting album. Getting back to the Fight Club soundtrack here, David Fincher wanted a soundtrack that was unconventional at the time. He didn't want necessarily like a conventional movie soundtrack for Fight Club, because Fight Club is not a conventional narrative or even really like a conventional movie in some ways. And so he enlisted the Dust Brothers, who were at the time very widely known for their brand of hip hop production, especially since their brand of hip hop production, as we talked about earlier with Paul's Boutique, very kind of Plunderphonics coded a little bit, very sample heavy. Dust Brothers production tends to be kind of dry in a very good way, in that like all of like the samples and the drums kind of hit in a particular way that's just very satisfying to it, very funky stuff as well. And so he enlisted them to create the soundtrack, and they did, but they didn't do it in their usual style. They didn't do it in their usual hip hop style. Instead, they took a lot of influence from like big beat and acid techno, and that was popular around the time. Although I think, if I remember correctly, Fight Club I think is a post 2000s movie, if I remember correctly. But they took a lot of influence from like big beat and stuff like that, and so what you get is a very kind of big beat flavored soundtrack to it. But don't go into this collection of songs thinking that you're going to get like self-contained songs. The Fight Club soundtrack is less like a collection of self-contained songs than it is like a tapestry of different moods and ideas and like snippets and things like that. It's almost kind of experimental in a way. Not super experimental. I do think that this is a soundtrack that you can absolutely get into. It's very accessible in a way. But at the same time, it took me, what I'm trying to say is that it did take me a while to actually even get into the Fight Club soundtrack. Because at first I listened to it and I was like, where's the beginning and ending of some of this stuff? Where it feels like we're going in 9 different directions in the same song. What's going on? Now I kind of see the more what the Dust Brothers were doing, and I appreciate this album a lot. I think it's really cool, and if you haven't listened to the Fight Club soundtrack just in isolation, you really should. It's a great soundtrack. So you have that versus Meat Beat Manifesto's Storm the Studio, which is an album that not many people might not know about. So Meat Beat Manifesto is the primary musical project of producer Jack Dangers. And Jack has, under the name of Meat Beat Manifesto, Jack has worked with a number of different people. Meat Beat Manifesto doesn't necessarily have like a a solid lineup or anything like that. So sometimes some albums under that name could be done by just Jack. Other names could be done, or other albums could be done with Jack and a couple of musicians that are aiding him. And so Storm the Studio was the first album that he released under this name, and it was done with Greg Wretch, I believe is the person he worked with on this album. And it almost wasn't their first album. Initially, Jack wanted to release an album called Armed Audio Warfare, if I remember correctly. But it got, I think like the tapes got damaged in like flooding or something like that, or something happened to where he couldn't, or they, I guess, Meat Beat Fan Manifesto couldn't use the original recordings that they had for the sessions, and so they re-recorded everything. And to save money, what they did is they normally went into studios after hours while they were technically supposed to be closed. They like snuck into them and worked onto the album, kind of like in secret a little bit. And so that's where the album partially gets its name, Storm the Studio, because they were kind of like storming studios and doing this album in kind of pirate style. This album also kind of gets its name from a quote from the author who wrote Naked Lunch. I'm trying to remember his name. I don't remember his name. I'll put it up on the screen, but it's a super famous author. I know he wrote Naked Lunch, and I'm gonna remember his name later. And I'm gonna kick myself. William S. Burroughs, that's his name. Just got it. But actually getting into the content of this album itself. So as I said, Big Beat was a genre that mainly kind of started around 93, 94, perhaps even 92 to a degree. This album, Storm the Studio, was released in 1989, so well before Big Beat actually became a thing. But this Storm the Studio has a lot of elements to it that is very proto Big Beat and really kind of proto 90s electronic dance music in general. The production work that Meat Beat Manifesto does on this album is frankly insane for 1989. This album is ahead of its time in so many different degrees. It's so creative, so blood pumping, and to even call it one genre, like if I were to call this a Big Beat album, it would be doing it a disservice because it's not just the sound of Big Beat. You have a lot of hip hop on here. You have a lot of electronic music on here. You have a lot of noise music on here. You have dub on here. You got maybe some rock here and there as well. So a lot of different ideas going into this album, and it's such a monster. It's a long album, but it's such a gratifying listen, at least for me, because I find it so creative and so ahead of its time. And even to this day, it's such a fresh sounding album to me that even though I really enjoyed the Fight Club soundtrack and I think it deserves its due, I think Storm the Studio is just such an amazing album in general that it should move on. And if you haven't listened to Storm the Studio yet, you should definitely go and seek out the remastered version of it that is on Bandcamp, that is on Meat Beat Manifesto's Bandcamp. Check it out. It's incredible. This album is incredible, and it absolutely deserves to move forward. All right, so the next bracket we have here, we got a stinker versus a Goliath. We got Fatboy Slim's Palookaville versus the Chemical Brothers' Dig Your Own Hole. So Palookaville, for those who do not know, is Fatboy Slim's final album, released I think in 2000. I want to say 2001, if not 2002 specifically. It is Norman Cook's final album as Fatboy Slim. Cook has like one more album to his name after that. It's actually a collaboration with Talking Heads' David Byrne called Here Love Lies. It's actually like a play as well. We don't actually have to get into it too much. What I'm trying to say is that Palookaville is kind of the sound of the death of Big Beat, in my opinion. Well, I think Palookaville is a little overhated, and I do think that there are sounds on it that sound very modern, especially even to today. There's some sounds on this record that I think are kind of ahead of their time a little bit. This album as a whole, though, it's very bare. It's very stripped back compared to anything else Cook has ever done. That element of obnoxiousness is still there as well that you have from his other previous records. And so to me, kind of a weak record, one that I put on this bracket initially because I remember really liking it, but re-listening to it for this specific video, I really kind of heard the flaws throughout it, and I can't say that I like it as much as I once did. So that's Palookaville versus Dig Your Own Hole by the Chemical Brothers, which is probably, for a long time, for me, this was the Chemical Brothers' best record. Dig Your Own Hole is such. I don't. Where to begin? The production on this album is just awesome. This album sounds amazing. There's so many great tracks on this album, like the title track, like Block Rockin' Beats, like Setting Sun, like what's that called? Down in the K-hole or something like that. Even the closing track, Private Psychedelic Real, just so incredible, so amazing. There's just so much great stuff to this record. It's not necessarily my favorite. Um, it's not my favorite Chemical Brothers record anymore. I would say Exit Planet Dust. I think I like a little bit more now. And the main thing that I think sets Dig Your Own Hole, or sets it back, would be two tracks kind of in the middle of the record that do create kind of a quality lull. That would be Don't Stop the Rock and It Doesn't Matter. Those two tracks in particular, I think, are the clear blemish of this album and does make getting through the middle of this album a little bit of a slog. But if you can get through those two tracks, you're going to be in for one hell of a listening experience. Love Dig Your Own Hole. So obviously, in this pairing, it moves forward. It's a great record. Amazing record. Next, we have two records that are a little bit more. I don't. How do you describe it? I feel like Vegas by the Crystal Method, which is the first album here, is still pretty widely liked. As I said when I was talking about Tweekend, Crystal Method, very good at production, very good at having very good sounding albums, but the actual songs themselves are not very memorable. And I think it applies. I think that applies to most of Vegas. There are, like, I would say, 2 to 3 memorable tracks on this album compared to Tweekend, which had like one. And unlike Tweekend, this is not an album where I feel like I listen to it and I get dumber. I do think that the general mood and vibe of Vegas is pretty decent. It's pretty good. That being said, not the strongest record on this bracket, and that's going to be a shame because we're going up against Propellerheads' Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll, which for a long time has been one of my favorite deep cuts within Big Beat. I love Propellerheads' genre or style of Big Beat here, how they kind of go from like kind of psychedelic low end stuff to kind of movie soundtrack inspired stuff. There's also the track Spy Break on this album, which was featured in the famous vault like vault scene in the Matrix when Trinity and Neo are kind of going into the vault for like the final third of the movie, and you get all those cool slow motion effects. That's Spy Break that's playing in the background of that. So you have that track on here. You have History Repeating featuring Shirley Bassey, which is just amazing. One of the best singles within Big Beat. So, I mean, obviously for me, Decks and Drums just kind of trounces anything that Crystal Method would have done. So that's how I feel. Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll, amazing album. The next pairing we got here, we're kind of reaching the end of the first tier of the bracket here. So for the penultimate pairing for the first tier here, we have Chemical Brothers' Come With Us versus Meat Beat Manifesto's 99%. So you have Come With Us, which for the Chemical Brothers, the narrative seems to be, to me, that the classic era of Chemical Brothers would be Exit Planet Dust to Surrender. Seems that those 3 albums are very widely loved, and it seems like, for a lot of people, it seems like Come With Us is when the Chemical Brothers start to dip in quality. Now, I've already given my opinion on Surrender. I don't think it's very good. So for me, I think that this is actually a step up and a breath of fresh air, and probably the last gasps of like great Big Beat before it would ultimately go to die in the 2000s. Because I think this album, I think Come With Us released in the year 2000, if I remember correctly. And I love what the Chemical Brothers do here. You still have that psychedelia from Surrender, but you still they're bringing back those dance elements more and more in Come With Us, and I think that the overall flow of the record in general is just a whole lot better. So many more memorable tracks as well, like My Elastic Eye, Star Guitar, the title track that opens the record, really good. I also love the transition between Galaxy Bounce and It Began in Africa. Super great like transition on that one. One of my favorite transitions within dance music in general. So overall, I think "Come With Us" is a really solid record that I think really should get more love, in my opinion. Meanwhile, we get 99% by Meat Beat Manifesto. So I talked about Storm the Studio and how it is like a bunch of different things to where it really defies categorization in a lot of ways. 99% is sort of the same thing, but it's kind of scary how this album gets a lot closer to Big Beat than Storm the Studio did. And for reference, 99% is the album that came after Storm the Studio. So it is technically Meat Beat Manifesto's sophomore album, though I do believe that I think Meat Beat Manifesto were able to like get the tapes back for Armed Audio Warfare and did like release that on CD kind of in between those two, but I don't know if you can necessarily count that as like part of like the core album lineup or anything like that. But 99%, very good album. I think a lot of what makes Jack Dangers interesting as a producer and Meat Beat Manifesto interesting as a recording project comes from this album. A lot of very interesting ideas here, a lot of really good songs here as well. But you also get that experimentalism and that kind of uh, defiance of structure that would go on to define later Meat Beat Manifesto records. Excuse me, I'm sorry for the burping. So for me personally, while I like 99% a lot, as I said, there are songs on it that kind of defy structure, and I like structure in my music to a degree. There are certain albums that can get around that, like say For Your Ears Only, or like Fight Club on this bracket. But for the most part, I'm a structure guy, and you get structure abound with Come With Us. I just think for me, Come With Us is the better record, and again, I think more people should give Come With Us a better chance, a better kind of lease on life here, because I do think it's a great record. And oh, we have two more. So we have two more on this first tier here. We have the Wise Guys' Antidote versus the Prodigy's Music for the Jilted Generation. So the Wise Guys, I believe part of the label of Wall of Sound, they are a group of musicians that I really like. They released an album before this one, so this is the Antidote. They released another album before this one called Executive Suite, which is decent. After that, they released this, which is a little bit more kind of going towards Big Beat, though I will say that in terms of, I think the Antidote is also a little bit kind of proto chill hop and proto lo-fi hip hop in a way, like that kind of sound. If you like lo-fi hip hop, or if you like chill hop, or like that kind of that genre of like hip hop that might appear on like the girl, like, you know, doing homework on stream type of music, I would say check this out. It's not, it's more energetic than that style, but you can definitely hear the beginnings of it on records like this, or what New Jabez was doing at the time as well. But you got a couple of decent singles that come from this as well. Ooh La La is very well remembered from the Antidote, as well as Start the Commotion. I also like the closing track Bounce a lot. There's also other tracks that I really like where it sounds like the Wise Guys are like trying to tell a story with the song. Tracks like I think it's called The Search's End, or if not The Search's End, then just The Search. And then Face the Flames, another great one on this album as well. So if there were, if I think a problem with this album is a problem that is a problem with many 90s albums, which is that it does just kind of run a little long. And so as you kind of get more and more through it, you kind of get it after a while. You get the sound that they're kind of going for and what they're doing. And it I do think that the antidote kind of overstays its welcome a little bit. And this might be a little bit of a blasphemy, but speaking of overstaying your welcome, let's talk about music for the Jilted generation. Probably still to this day one of the angriest electronic dance music records I've ever listened to. Music for the Jilted generation is an extremely important album for Big Beat and especially the Prodigy. While while Liam's debut album Experience is very good, it isn't necessarily Big Beat. It's more kind of just breakbeat than anything else, but still an amazing breakbeat kind of UK rave, especially that early UK rave sound. Very good album for that sound. Meanwhile, this is where the Prodigy music for the Jilted generation is where the Prodigy starts to find the sound that they would kind of work with throughout the rest of their career. Especially, this is kind of Liam's like aha moment in terms of like what he wants the Prodigy and specifically his style of music to sound like. And it was largely successful. To this day, music for the Jilted generation is widely beloved by many, especially when it comes to like again UK rave music and breakbeat music and big beat music. There's so much to enjoy, so many songs that are just so iconic, like Poison, Start the Dance on here as well. Their Law, amazing track. Break and Enter that starts this album off, really good as well. Just so many great tracks on music for the Jilted generation. Now, like I said, while I heavily enjoy Jilted for the generation, Jilted generation. While I heavily enjoy Jilted generation, one thing I dislike about it is its length. I think this is one of those albums that is over an hour long, and if it's not, I'm not looking at the length right now. Obviously, I'm just looking at this picture. But thinking back on it, if it's not an hour long, it certainly feels like an hour long. It feels like the Prodigy are just kind of going way too long on some of these ideas, and that they need to kind of strip it back and make a more compact package. And they would with their next album. Fat of the Land follows Jilted Generation, and that to me is where Liam takes this sound that he establishes on Jilted Generation and really crystallizes it into something truly special. So that being said, I'm gonna go with Jilted Generation. Which where did I put that in? Did I put that in J? I put that in M. So I'm gonna go with Jilted Generation. I think it's the better album. I think it's got the more iconic songs, and I think it is just it's such a behemoth when it comes to Big Beat that it can't not move forward when going against the Antidote. As much as I like the Antidote, and I think more people should give the Antidote a try, I do think that Jilted Generation is like it's the better, more solid project in my opinion. And here we go. We got the final last matchup for tier 1 of this bracket. We have Junkie XL's Saturday Teenage Kick versus Apollo 440's Electro Glide in Blue. So, for me, there's a clear winner here. Very clear winner here. But I will talk a little bit about each record. One, there's Junkie XL's Saturday Teenage Kick, which there's a lot of video game soundtracks out there that do take from Big Beat and are kind of influenced by it. And I feel like if there's one album that isn't necessarily a video game soundtrack, but kind of symbolizes what the video game soundtrack Big Beat vibe is, it would be Junkie XL's album. It does have that. If you like, say, the Tekken 3 soundtrack, you should absolutely listen to Saturday Teenage Kick. There's a lot of really good ideas on it. Like the two albums I just talked about, it does go on for way too long. Plus, it has a secret bonus track at the end, which is something that was also very pervasive in the 90s. You had to have like a bonus track at the end of like a long period of silence. So that's on this record. But several good tracks, in my opinion, on Saturday Teenage Kick. There are also a little bit of stinkers. I'm mainly thinking of Metro Like on this album. To me, don't like the flow of that track. Don't like the rapping and the rhyme schemes on that track. But everything else here, I think, is solid. Not amazing, but I would say Saturday Teenage Kick is a solid big beat record. It is like if you were to kind of if I were to like think about the space between like an 8 out of 10 record and a 7 out of 10 record, like the precipice of that, Junkie XL would be right there. It's kind of like it's on the edge of being both an 8 and a 7, to where it's a great record but also not like super great. You know what I mean? So that's how I feel about Saturday Teenage Kick. Something that I would recommend, even if it is a bit long. And then we're gonna get to Electroglide in Blue, which initially going into this bracket, I thought this would be my least favorite record of all time, or not of all time. Excuse me, of this bracket, because I do not remember liking this album at all. Listening to Electroglide now, I appreciate it just a little bit more. I think I was being a little bit too hard on it the first time I listened to this record. There's some interesting facets to Apollo 440's sound, especially how he takes influence from like movie scores and even like breakbeat and dub to an extent. But overall, I still don't think Electroglide is an album for me. And while I can see why certain people would like it and why Electroglide does appear at like the top big beat albums ever released lists, I would say for me, Saturday Teenage Kick is the better record, and it's the one that you should go to for more or towards first. I would say Electroglide is like a record you would go for if you've listened to all the great stuff and you're looking for more, but not stuff that's necessarily good. I know there's a fan base out there for Electroglide in Blue. It's not me. So there you go. There's our first tier of the bracket. And so now we have 16 albums that are going forward here. I'll kind of zoom into them a little bit more so you can see what we've got going for it. So now that we're in the second tier, we can go a little bit faster now that we don't have to describe the background and the sound of each record. So let's kind of get into the second tier here. And the first matchup we have here is the Prodigy's Invaders Must Die versus the Jet Set Radio original soundtrack. And I think, for me, personally, I enjoy Invaders Must Die a lot more than the Jet Set Radio soundtrack. Again, for me, the big thing about the Jet Set Radio soundtrack, the original one, or rather what the track listing as it is presented, the Hideki Naganuma stuff is strong, the Richard Jacques stuff is strong, but everything else kind of falls by the wayside. Meanwhile, Invaders Must Die, again, I think it's a classic that needs a lot more attention. It's such a great record. This is such a great electronic dance music record, and I wish more people would talk about it. So for me, Invaders Must Die must move forward. Next, we have Fatherland versus Generalization, one of the greatest big beat records, one of the greatest dance records of all time, versus a very solid big beat record, in my opinion. So I think that makes it clear which one I'm going to go for. Personally, I'm going to go with Fatherland, which, again, I want to point out, Generalization by Midfield General, definitely something you should listen to. If you haven't listened to it, you really should. I think it's a solid big beat record. It's got a lot of really good ideas to it, but Fatherland is such a special record within this genre and within electronic dance music in general. I don't see why it shouldn't go forward within this particular matchup. Next, we have Boom Boom Satellites' Out Loud versus Jet Set Radio Future, that original soundtrack. And I think, again, given on how I've talked about Jet Set Radio Future, how it's one of my favorite things ever made, it's obviously going to go forward. As I said, I kind of gave the game away. That being said, Out Loud is such a great record that I kind of wish it was the one that was moving forward here. Out Loud has just such a great atmosphere to it. I love that nocturnal vibe. I love that jazzy vibe to it. Love Push Eject. I wish I could bring it more forward, but when you're going against Jet Set Radio Future, you got to be one of the greatest albums of all time to really succeed against it. And that I don't think Out Loud is that, but Out Loud is very, very, very good. And then we get the final matchup of the first tier, which or first tier left side. That'd be Adam Freeland's Now and Them versus Groove Armada's Vertigo. So we have Now and Them, which is a very solid record, New School Breaks record. That is Big Beat adjacent, got kind of like a conceptual commentary edge to it, versus probably one of the better down tempo adjacent albums I've heard, and an album that I said if you took 2 tracks away from it would probably be a near perfect record for me. I feel like this is a matchup that is hard. At least for me, it's a matchup that is hard. Because like I'm trying to think, it's a Sunday that I'm currently recording on. It's Sunday. I'm doing chores. I have to pick between these 2 albums. What am I choosing? I think, and again, I have to include the 2 tracks. I have to include the 2 tracks on Vertigo that I dislike in this decision. Even with those 2 tracks, I think Vertigo, for me, moves forward. Vertigo, to me, when it works so extremely well that I love it. It's great. And there's nothing else quite like it. So even with those 2 tracks I dislike, I think Vertigo moves forward over Now and Them, even though Now and Them is a really, really good record. Now we're going to move over to the right side. We're going to have Bentley Rhythm Ace's debut album versus Chemical Brothers' debut album. And again, Chemical Brothers' Exit Planet Dust, one of the most important records on this bracket, versus a record I will go to bat for all the time. I think Bentley Rhythm Ace's self-titled debut, super underrated, super underappreciated, should have more eyes on it, should have more ears on it, rather. Love that record to death. That being said, it's not beating Exit Planet Dust. like Fatland, like Jet Set Radio Future, you have to be a really, really, really special album to beat Exit Planet Dust. And unfortunately, even though based on how much I love it, Bentley Rhythm Ace's debut is not that. It's not that special album. Next, we have a really tough matchup for me. Meat Beat Manifesto's Storm the Studio versus Chemical Brothers' Dig Your Own Hole. I feel like a lot of people know of Dig Your Own Hole. And so they would go with Dig Your Own Hole over Storm the Studio, because that's the one that's really widely loved and people know it, and it's such a classic within the big beat genre. That being said, as I've talked about with Storm the Studio, even though it's not necessarily like a big beat album, as I said, Storm the Studio is an album that defies categorization. It is also an album that is ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and an album that really is amazing. To know it is to really love it, and I think, to me, because I know it, I really love it, and I would put this over Dig Your Own Hole, in my opinion. I love Storm the Studio a whole lot more. So that's what I'm going to go with. And then we're going to have Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll versus Come With Us. This is actually another tough one for me, because I really love Decks and Drums and the variety that it brings. Meanwhile, in terms of like album flow, I think Come With Us is a lot stronger. God. Again, I'm doing chores. In the car, driving to work. I'm listening to music for fun. What do I choose? What is the album I like more? I'm going to go with... Again, I think this is a tough choice for me. I'm going to go with Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll. Even though it is a little bit more all over the place in terms of album flow, I think the songs are stronger, and I think that the memorability for me is stronger overall than Come With Us is. Even though, again, I think Come With Us should have its day in the light. I think people should stop glazing Surrender and become one with the Come With Us. So that's what I think. And then we had the final matchup of Tier 2. Prodigy's Music for the Jilted Generation versus Saturday Teenage Kick. And as I said with Teenage Kick, kind of skirts the line between an 8 and a 7. Meanwhile, Jilted Generation certainly does not. Jilted Generation, one of the most important albums of the genre, one of the most important albums for the Prodigy, an album that is very widely loved, an album that I think just has a stronger track listing and just a stronger overall vibe, especially since both of these are long records. I would rather listen to a long record that I enjoy a whole lot more than a long record that I appreciate a lot. And that's how I ultimately feel. So I would go with Music for the Jilted Generation. So that does it for tier 2. We have 8 left. Try and get them all on the screen here. So that's what tier 2 looks like. Now let's get into the final 4. We're going to get some tough choices here. Starting with first, probably not that tough of a choice, actually, between 2 Prodigy albums, Invaders Must Die versus Fad the Land. Now, listen, in my heart, in my soul, Invaders Must Die is an incredible record. It is a record that I love to listen to and gets my blood pumping and is just so memorable, and I think it's some of Liam's best work. Amazing record. That being said, it's not beating Fat of the Land. And to sit here and say that Invaders Must Die is better than Prodigy's Fat of the Land would be lunatic behavior. Lunatic behavior. Be absolutely crazy. So yeah, absolutely Fat of the Land would move forward. And then we have Jet Set Radio Future versus Vertigo, which this is a no contest. I've already talked enough about Vertigo and those 2 songs and how they kind of hold the album back. Meanwhile, Jet Set Radio Future, near perfect album. Gotta have something super special to go against it in order to really have a contest. So while Vertigo definitely deserves to have moved as forward as it did in this bracket, there's no way it's beating Jet Set Radio. No way. no way. So now we got 2 albums here. The most important album on this bracket, Exit Planet Dust, versus an album that not many people has heard of, but an album that is very much ahead of its time, Storm the Studio by Meat Beat Manifesto. This is kind of a hard choice for me, but not really. I know which one moves forward. I think, for me, Exit Planet Dust, amazing record, near perfect album, really indicative of the Big Beat sound. Like, if I were ranking albums purely on like how well they represent Big Beat as a genre, Exit Planet Dust is the one moving forward. That being said, I'm going to give it to Storm the Studio by Meat Beat Manifesto. And my reason being, again, it's a record that is ahead of its time, super influential, super defies categorization, so creative, so mind-blowing in its sonics that, like, while these are 2 near perfect records for me, Storm the Studio is just such a monster of a record that I can't see it, like, I can't see it not moving on, in my opinion. And then we have Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll versus the Prodigy's Music for the Jilted Generation, which for me, this is no contest. I'm going to go with Jilted Generation every time. While I love Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll, as I said, tons of great tracks on it. In terms of, like, importance, in terms of the songs, in terms of legacy, it's got to go to Jilted Generation. It is, like, it's a very important Prodigy album, in my opinion. So there you go. Now we have 4 left. 4 albums left. I kind of got them in the frame here. We have Prodigy's Fat of the Land versus Jet Set Radio Future. And then we have Storm the Studio versus Music for the Jilted Generation by the Prodigy. Now I'm going to do this in reverse order this time. I'm going to start from the right because the right's the easier choice. When it comes to Storm the Studio versus Music for the Jilted Generation, I already labeled a very big critique with Jilted Generation, which is its length. While I do like the album a lot, or I would say like is even kind of underselling it. I do love Jilted Generation. I think it's just a really good album, but it overstays its welcome after a certain point. And I think that like we already have another album from the Prodigy that, as I said, takes the sound of Jilted Generation, really crystallizes it, and really kind of perfects it. So I don't think Jilted Generation moves on. I think Storm in the Studio moves on, and I think it moves on to the final bracket. Now, got a tougher choice here on the left. We got Fatherland versus the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack. Two very special albums. As I said, when going up against the Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack, you need to have a very special album to go up against it, to have a tough choice, and Fatherland is that special album. It is one of the best electronic dance music records of all time. It is the best big beat record in my opinion. If you're to go in for like just pure big beat, I think it's the best big beat record. It's an amazing record. It's like, for me, Fatherland, like you can't go wrong with it. You really can't go wrong with it. It's one of those records that really deserves its place within the annals of history. That being said, that being said, I did say way earlier on, kind of gave the game away a little bit. Jet Set Radio Future, one of my favorite records of all time. One of the boldest, most creative projects to have graced this earth, in my opinion. And so that's where we're at. We're at the final bracket here. The last two, and I can't think of two albums that better deserve to be in a final bracket for a big beat bracket than Jet Set Radio Future versus Storm the Studio. And the reason why these are perfect is because you get two different ends of this genre. You get the kind of the very beginnings of this genre. Storm the Studio came out in 1989 and is very much a forebearer of what was to come, versus Jet Set Radio Future, which I believe released, I think, at least the video game released, I think, in 2002. So you get that right at the end, the end of life of big beat as a genre, and what a way to go out with that, other than like one of the best records of all time. And so you have Jet Set Radio Future, which is amazing and perfect and incredible, versus Storm the Studio, which is ahead of its time, amazing, incredible, perfect, mind-blowing in every way. Just an amazing record in general. And this really kind of comes down to preference, at least for me. And in terms of like what I'm most nostalgic for, what I think I would reach for if you were to give me these two albums, and what I think is one of the greatest records of all time. And that, of course, would be Jet Set Radio Future soundtrack. Truly, as I said, a towering achievement for music as a medium, and a towering achievement for like Sega and video game music and big beat music and sample based music, and just this album is just so magical to me that, as I said when I first began this video, I knew what was going to win this entire bracket, and I knew it was going to be Jet Set Radio Future, because it's one of those albums that is so special to me that I can't see what other album in general, within the history of musical albums, within the history of the album era, I can't see what other album would go above this for me in terms of enjoyability. For me, this is the album I enjoy the most. To me, this is the best big beat album, and to me, this is the winner of today's bracket. And so there you go. Let's get a zoomed out view of the rest of the bracket here, and kind of admire the journey we've took here. That's 32 big beat records. Talked about all of them. Probably going to be an hour-long video. That's fine. But that's my thoughts, and that's my bracket. And that, I think, that was enjoyable. That was an enjoyable time for me. I had a really good time listening through all 32 of these records. Mostly a really good time. I'm blocking out Tweekend. I'm not looking at it. But everything else here, really enjoyed. And what I can take away from this is that, yes, I do really love Big Beat, and I really do love that the sounds that it brings, but I also really love that it can be very diverse and that you can have a lot of different moods and a lot of different ways to go here. These are not 32 similarly sounding albums. Each one of these albums kind of represents a different vibe and a different aesthetic, and there's like a different scenario for each of these different 32 albums where the album might be good for that scenario. At least I think so. So I think we have a really diverse bracket here, and ultimately, I would say that even though I've picked one winner here, there's plenty of great records on this image that I'm looking at right now and that I've talked about today that you should go out of your way to listen to and go out of your way to familiarize yourself with, because there's a lot of good here. And so that is the Big Beat bracket. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for indulging in my madness today. If you like my content, you can like, comment, or subscribe. You can ring the bell as well to get notifications when I upload videos. And with that out of the way, thank you everybody for watching my Big Beat bracket, and I hope you have a nice day.